Welcome to BIGtalk, a series of power talks by industry and thought leaders that inspire progress and unlock innovation. BIGtalk, unlocking the next big thing.
Talking about 21st century skills, and I think one of the things for me when I had that topic was actually the first question is, what are 21st century skills? And one of the first things I would want to ask is, what do we understand by that phrase? We use it a lot. It's used in that introduction. Here we go. We're about to start. Thank you. And when we talk about 21st century skills, we automatically start to think about all these things up here. And what I'd like to do this evening is to actually challenge us maybe to think a little bit differently and to say, are they 21st century skills? Or actually, are the things we're talking about skills of a human being and skills that maybe we have not thought about in the correct way for a long time? As we go through this presentation and my talking, you're going to see some clear indicators for some of the critical skills that I think we need in the 21st century. One of the things we need to do first is to think about us as human beings. If you think about a child when they're born with an innate desire to learn. We are just wired. We are hardwired to learn, aren't we? We just love it. Think about a baby from zero. What they learn in those first 3 years is astounding, isn't it? They go from being a completely helpless being to being a child who has the use of language. They have fine and gross motor skills. They have emotional intelligence. They've learnt how to deal with other people. They know where they fit in their family and in their society. In 3 years, they've gone from zero to that, which is phenomenal. But how did they do that? If you look at the way in which the brain works, and I would love to keep talking on this, but I'm aware I only have 15 minutes, so I won't. But the brain works in incredible ways. And the age group, 0 to 3, every second there is a neural connection made 700 times. Just imagine, every second that passes, the brain is making new connections. Some of those connections will lead to a skill or an observation or an experience that is there for life. Some of them won't, because it's what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste forms an experience, and the brain responds to that. By the age of 7, all the billions of connections are there. But if you're not using them, then the brain is quite sensible and it starts to prune them, rather like you'd prune a tree. And so it takes out the ones that aren't being used. And as you experience more and you grow, think of language particularly, as you get more sophisticated with your use of language, the brain is keeping all of those things in its memory bank. And if you're not using it, then it's pruned and you lose it. But the brain has an infinite capacity, and we really mainly use maybe 10, 15% if we're lucky, because we don't utilize all of those skills. So 0 to 3, unique individual. Each one of you in this room is a unique individual. The way in which your brain is wired is determined by your environment, by your family background, by your genes, so many factors. So we are unique, but we're unique as human beings, but the one thing that's common for all of us is that we learn, and we love to learn. Even if you didn't particularly enjoy school, there will be some things in your life you've really enjoyed learning. I was talking to a gentleman last night who at the age of 63 decided he was bored and wasn't learning enough, so he started to learn to fly because he felt his brain had the capacity to do something new. That's awesome. We never ever stop learning. But when we're talking about learning, we talk about those 4 C's that are up there. As part of the skills that we have as human beings, we utilize those things. Our creativity. The person who thought up doing BIGtalk, the building we're in was designed by somebody. The chairs you're sitting in were designed by somebody. Somebody had a good idea and they made it happen. So creativity is part of who we are. how many of us as children would imagine a world with tea parties or armies fighting each other, or we'd be digging dens, we'd be having secret conversations with imaginary people? Our creativity is innate, it's human. Collaboration. We're not very good as isolated human beings. We need other people. The way in which we think, the way in which we work is about working together. In isolation, we don't achieve as much as we do as if we work together. Communication. We don't do anything without communication, whether it's verbal or non-verbal. Communication skills are vital in the world that we live in. And critical thinking. How many times do we talk about critical thinking as individuals? We use that word, but what does it actually mean? What is critical thinking? Is it about just having a go at everybody and going, what are you thinking? No. It's actually about thinking objectively about different situations, different problems. It's about problem solving. It's about finding a way to get a solution to a problem, whether it's queuing for fuel, which maybe we need to be thinking about, or maybe it's about what we're going to have for dinner tonight because there wasn't what we wanted in the shop. As a child, you find ways round a problem. As a child, you can be building a sandcastle and it goes wrong, so you find another way of doing it. You try things, you experiment, you problem solve, and critical thinking is absolutely key to what we need as learners. One of many things I would like to challenge you with tonight is the education system that you all grew up in was very much one of what I would call a linear process. From the Industrial Revolution, the model of we need people in factories doing jobs. We need people to be able to follow instruction, to work as a team. That linear process assumes that we all learn in the same way. It assumes that we all want to end up in the same place. And if we've agreed we're unique, then that doesn't really work. And you may have seen this analogy before. We have an elephant, and we have a fish, and we have a monkey. And in order to be completely fair, we set a test for those three animals. The test is to see which one can climb the tree first. Now, I hope you can see where I'm going with this. Really, the fish is going to struggle. And the elephant, not so much. The monkey is going to win that test because he has the skill to climb the tree. But does that make the other two animals irrelevant? Does that make those two failures? Is that test fair? The system of education that we have currently assumes largely that we're all the same. It assumes that we're going to walk into a classroom and we're all going to sit down and we're going to learn in the same way and achieve the same results, which is not reality. So my suggestion actually is that our linear process of education is no longer fit for purpose. Maybe it never was, but certainly is not now. And that we need to think differently about how we do education. Education for me is what I would call an agricultural process. It's a process whereby we provide an environment that nurtures individuals. Provide an environment where your child can learn in a way that works for them. Because if we say one size fits all, we're actually condemning a huge percentage of our children not to have the opportunity to learn in the way their brain is wired. And I'm sure all of us can have testament to that in our own lives, that actually education didn't work for them. I think when I was in school, I was probably the fish. I was mainly a fish out of water because it did not work for me. And I needed to, I can remember sitting in a classroom thinking, this is rubbish. I can't do this. Not because I was not capable, but because it just did not work for me. I needed it in a different way. So I'm proposing tonight that education needs to change. Education needs to use those skills, those 21st century skills, but in a way that allows us to teach individuals in the way that works for them. That dynamic education. An education that actually delivers what your child needs, what our industry needs, what business needs. Because if we create a model of individual, a model of child that actually is inadequate because they're not being taught in the way that works for them, how are we preparing people for the world they're going into? How do you, as business people, utilize the students that come your way if they don't have the skills you need them to have? So critical thinking skills, for me, are massive. And one of the things I think this environment should allow us to do is to think differently. And I would propose one of the things that we should think about is reviewing how schools work. And I've called it Schools Without Borders, because I think we've gone way past the days where you put your children into school, and as you leave, we shut the door, and we get on teaching your children, and then we spit them out at the end of the day. Because we're no longer in a world where what happens in school is all that happens. We have access to internet, we have access to experts, we have access to global communities, social media, all the things we love and hate about the technology that we live with actually means that our schools are without borders. The exciting thing about that is it means we have no limits. It means we can do education differently. And it means that we can ensure that our children have the opportunities that they need to utilize the skills that they have as human beings, which are those critical thinking skills. Those 21st century skills, those 4 C's that we mentioned just now, are really what we have to build on. And I would suggest that in our industry, in our schools, in our universities, we have to build on those skills. But please, let's not go away saying, we've got all these new skills we must learn. Actually, no, we haven't. We've got 4 very basic skills we need to reintroduce into our children's lives, into our schools, into our universities, into our businesses, and say, you are empowered to go think for yourself. You are empowered to problem solve. We are not going to feed you information and say, just get on with it. We are going to empower you to do things in the way that work for you. That brain, which develops so phenomenally quickly up to the age of 3, continues to develop and is developing still within all of us. So don't for 1 minute think that because you're sat here, that your learning days are done. I would challenge you to look at those 4 sets of skills there. Which ones do you employ? Which ones do you understand? Which ones can you go away and build on? How critically do you think? Do you challenge people's thinking? Do you believe everything you read in the newspaper? Do you believe everything you hear on the news? If you do, I challenge you to go away and think again. If you don't, what do you do with your questioning? Do you actually do anything positive with it? In your communication, how well do you communicate with people? Are you good at saying what you think, or are you good at saying what you think people want you to say? That's a trait, isn't it, that we all have. We're very good at looking at somebody's face and thinking we know what they want us to say. But if we're going to be honest and communicate freely, then we must be honest. If we're going to work together, that means we're going to have to share opinions, ideas, we're going to disagree. We're going to have discussions and debate. But out of that will come good decision making and collaboration between us all. Those 4 skills are critical for every one of us. And I would ask you to think about those very carefully. So 21st century. We have many skills on that list there, you can see, which are new. Emotional intelligence is not new, but intellectual and information literacy is new. So there are skills that we have to learn, skills we have to adapt to, but they all come out of those 4 core skills, which I would suggest are not 21st century at all. They're just human. And I think we've lost sight of it in our schools and maybe individually. That creativity, let's bring that back. As I look around the room, I can see a few people who I know who are incredibly creative in how they do what they do. But it's not for everybody, and we have to instill creativity in people. So those skills, those 21st century skills are great. We need all of those things, but please, the 4 core human skills, those 4 C's, think about them, utilize them, and help us as educators to become better at what we do by delivering what you need as family and as industry and as businesses in Bulawayo. Because we've got the opportunity to change this place. But in order to do that, we've got to think differently. I don't think I'm going to say any more. Thank you very much, everyone.
You've been watching Big Talk, a series of power talks by industry and thought leaders that inspire progress and unlock innovation. Big Talk, unlocking the next big thing.